Good evening, community, and welcome back to yet another coins.ph live stream. For tonight's discussion, I'm super excited to talk about this interesting new, token that's been introduced into the coins ecosystem. And maybe you guys are seeing headlines left and right. Silver hits new all-time high. Gold hits new all-time highs. Maybe you're wondering, you're a crypto trader, but you still want to get exposure to tokenized metals into your portfolio. So what perfect way to introduce another set of metals that you might not have heard about but maybe you're interested to learn about through XU308 or tokenized uranium. Please do share and like and drop a comment in our comment section below if you enjoy our discussion for this evening. And I hope that you learned something tonight as I introduce our guest for tonight from the team, Ben Elvidge, product lead of XU308. Ben, welcome to the show. How are you doing this fine morning where you are?
Yeah, so I guess it's just turned afternoon where I am. So I'm based in the UK. So great to be here and appreciate everyone being on later in the evening for you guys out in the Philippines. So thank you for having me.
Yes, good afternoon, Ben. And yes, it's like a prime time show for us. So I guess, Ben, maybe to kick off before we dive straight into the discussion about the token, maybe you can discuss a little bit about your role in the team and what it is you do, for the token and as the product lead of XE308.
Yeah, sure, happy to. I think look, I play two roles primarily, and I think that speaks to what we've built. So I manage all of the trading relationships and exchange relationships and oversee everything that we do around the distribution of the token itself. So that includes sort of having a great partnership with yourselves in getting XU308 listed on coins.ph, as well as I've got a broader role in terms of oversight of our platform, Uranium.io, which was the world's and is the world's first blockchain-based platform for buying and trading physical uranium. That's where we started, and then we extended our distribution capabilities onto centralized exchanges because good folks like your clients were keen to access tokenized uranium, and so we wanted to meet the market where it was. So we have our own venue and platform in uranium.io. You can still go there and learn about everything we've done and what XU308 is. But at the same time, we are listed on a number of centralized exchanges, including yourselves at coins.ph.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that introduction, Ben. I'm really excited to also learn from you a bit more about XU308 since I think a lot of people will hear about gold and silver, but what place does uranium have, in their portfolio, especially because you also dive into energy, right? So I think that's another sector that uranium touches on. So I think let's jump right into it. I guess the first question that I have for you is this. So XU308, some people might not understand why it's the ticker, but could you explain the significance of the ticker and how the token manages to represent, like ownership of this physical commodity like uranium on the blockchain?
Yeah, look, I think it's a great starting question. So actually what is behind and what the physical market is trading in is U308, which is a uranium oxide, is how it's commonly known, or folks may know it as yellow cake. This is uranium when it's been milled, so it's in its sort of early stages. It's not that radioactive. It's stored in barrels in one of 3 locations globally outside of Russia. So one in Canada, one in the US, and one in France. And this is primarily when people are looking to trade physical uranium. Before we launched, they'd be trading in yellow cake. So this is the base material that then gets enriched to be nuclear fuel and all of the stuff. And that's where the energy connection comes in. So nuclear reactors can only be powered as it stands right now on uranium. There is some innovation around that technology. So with that, I think it's a great way to play either the diversification piece into hard commodities and metals, or it's a play on the wider nuclear and energy theme, which is becoming even more critical as not just governments, particularly in Asia, where most reactors over the next 10, 20 years are expected to be built, but also private companies like the big tech companies looking at nuclear energy and restarting nuclear reactors to kind of power their needs from an AI perspective. So there's lots of different angles you can play from a thematic perspective, but also as an asset class, it's performed historically. This is absolutely not financial advice. You should do your own research, of course. Historically, it's performed better than the S&P 500 over the last 5 years. And certainly, as we've seen over the last month, it's on a bit of a rally at the moment, which is down to a lot of these supply and demand dynamics, because demand is increasing so much, and supply can't really keep up with that.
100%. Thanks for that breakdown, Ben. Yeah, I guess maybe some people, what they might be curious about now is why would they choose the token over investing in the traditional uranium mining stock or an ETF? So I want to dive straight into that. So how does owning XU308 differ from investing in traditional uranium mining stocks or specialized energy ETFs that investors might find in a more traditional stock market?
Yeah, again, another great question, and I think if I zoom out a little bit to talk to the kind of listeners about the market before we launched. So, if you wanted exposure to physical uranium before we launched as an asset, you either had to have the money to buy it in the physical market, which only trades at minimums of £100,000 in weight, which at current spot is about $8.5 to $9 million. So for most people, that's inaccessible. And so you had a couple of other options. Then you've referenced, ETFs. So yes, you can invest in the uranium miners ETF, or there's closed-ended investment trusts in North America and in the UK that essentially are closed-ended vehicles. So they often trade at a premium and discount, but when they raise money, they then buy physical uranium, and that's been the way most people had exposure to it. The difference in what we've done is with XU308, if you hold XU308, you have beneficial ownership to the physical uranium stored securely in the facilities in Canada. We use Cameco in Canada. And so actually what we've done is strip out all of that other risk elements, whether that's wider equity market risk, whether that's management team execution risk, whether that's if you're investing in uranium miners, yes, of course, they're affected by the price of uranium and the uranium market, but they're also driven by other factors. Their performance and price return is driven by a whole bunch of other factors outside of just uranium, right? Whether that's reputational, whether that's management team, whatever that might be. So we are working to make it as easy as possible for people to get into XU308, and that includes looking at how we partner and launch traditional products as well. But for us, it was really looking at it. It's a critical asset for nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is critical for all of society's demand. Everything we're doing is more electrified. Everything we're doing in society needs more power. Nuclear and uranium, pound for pound, is the best in terms of energy output. It's also very low carbon, so it's good. It's better from an environmental perspective than fossil fuels, of course, but also other means of energy production. But most people, until we launched, over 12 months ago, couldn't get access to the physical asset as an investment. And so that's what we were really trying to provide. And that's what we have provided with XU308.
Absolutely, access. Yeah, I think we touched on this, but just to go over it again. So the question is, since XU308 is backed by physical uranium, could you clarify where the actual yellow cake is stored? And maybe this one, so what kind of institutional grade custodians are responsible for its security? Because it's still, I guess, dangerous if you don't store it properly. So maybe you can touch on that a bit more and just reiterate it.
Yeah, look, I think that I mentioned them before. So there's three storage or conversion facilities where you can store U308, again, outside of Russia, given the current sanctions on Russia. So one is in Canada, one is in the US, and one is in France. So we use the Canadian firm called Cameco. These are all large companies that are involved across the uranium and nuclear fuel production cycle, right? So they don't just store uranium, but they also enrich it. They also do the milling that I mentioned earlier when they get the mined material. And these have to be, they're signed up to every regulatory requirement you can imagine, because they need to be, because of, as you rightly point out, the danger of the material if it gets into the wrong hands. So super secure, but also in terms of, as we think about the token, one of the big things we wanted to do, which is different from a lot of tokenized commodities, is be able to build a structure where people can take physical delivery. And so what I mean by that is if you have a converter account at one of these three facilities and you've got a big enough position, you can then instruct us to deliver that physical material and take the tokens from you, which is sort of then operating as any other spot commodity market would, right? If you think about wheat or corn or even gold and silver, right? The physical delivery aspect is critically important. So we can deliver on that. But what I would emphasize is it's not like you tell us to deliver it to your house and you don't want to be storing yellow cake in your garden. But if you've got a converter account and you're a bigger institutional investor, you're a utility involved in nuclear energy, you absolutely can use our tokens as a more capital efficient way of accessing physical uranium and building those positions. And then you can take physical delivery down the line.
Awesome. Yeah, I guess the next question I have here is so for a retail user in the Philippines or Brazil, because we also have coins.xyz in Brazil. What are the primary benefits of holding a commodity-backed token like XU308 or uranium as a hedge against inflation or market volatility? So, what place do you think does uranium have in someone's like investment portfolio? Of course, not financial advice, but
yeah.
Rationale.
So I think as we look at it, it's just I come from a TradFi background, right? So I've done the kind of CFA charter holder qualification. So and the whole portfolio construction philosophy. And if you go to a financial advisor, diversification is the key word, right? So you want to be able to your investment portfolio to be, from a best practice perspective, diversified as much as required, so you're not always reliant on everything going up at the same time. And that's where historically, and uranium is included in this, commodities are uncorrelated to a greater and lesser extent with other asset classes, whether that's equities, whether that's Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, whether that's gold, oil, and so uranium in particular has historically exhibited close to zero correlation with all of those other asset classes. So that becomes very powerful as you think about a wider investment portfolio, because you are able to generate returns at times when the wider market may not be going up. And as we think about it in relation to inflation and market volatility, again, you diversify to ride out those market volatility peaks and troughs, right? And you're not sort of just exposed to stock market volatility and wider macro volatility by having a diversification of assets. At the same time, there is some inflation hedge characteristics to it, not quite as transparent and clearly as gold and things like that, but because it isn't correlated, I think it's perhaps more powerful than just thinking about it as an inflation hedge as other commodities have been thought about. It is more driven by the supply and demand dynamics, and the projected demand over the next 20, 30 years is infinitely increasing, or exponentially increasing, I should say, not infinitely, but exponentially increasing in terms of nuclear. And so there's going to be increasing demand for uranium. And when there's a supply and demand deficit, as there is now, that typically is good news for commodities.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that answer. And I think, as you mentioned, diversification is so important because when you're constructing like your portfolio, it's beginner advice, but I think it's important because we have a lot of viewers who might not be, experienced, and they tend to put a lot of capital into one thing, and it ends up, getting them wrecked. So I think diversification and do your due diligence, with the token, and like formulate your own thesis on uranium or anything that you put your money into for that matter. So yeah, I mean, I guess the next thing that I'd also like to ask is maybe there's some people who are fans of on-chain, DeFi here. So maybe you can talk us a bit more about like the utility of XU308 within the DeFi or decentralized finance ecosystem, with its potential for use as collateral for loans or earning yield. And I did see that I think you guys are available on Morpho, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so we are. We are, as of we launched it in November. You're able to use XU308 as collateral to borrow USDC on Morpho, but you need to get into it via Oku. We're still working with Morpho to have Etherlink and XU308 available on the Morpho front end. But if you go to Oku, you absolutely can do that. And this was really important for us because not only have we made the market accessible to people that previously couldn't access it. At the same time, we've then shown that because it is a lot less volatile than many other crypto assets, and because this is just the commodity, right? It's just uranium. It just happens to be on blockchain rails that people can access it. The volatility from the previous question, which we didn't really get into, is about the same as the S&P 500, maybe a little bit more, which is obviously then a lot less than Bitcoin and even other blue chip cryptocurrencies. So because of that, it's actually quite a neat thing to be able to have the long-term exposure and the long-term, hopefully, positive performance, and we hope it's going to be positive. We certainly, if the demand dynamics play out, it should be, we hope. But then being able to then use it as collateral and borrow USDC means that you can then take advantage of any short-term, more volatile opportunities. So you can kind of get the best of both worlds, really. You can retain your exposure, assuming you stay within the margin requirements to XU308, but also then for what is, I consider, a very low interest rate right now as it stands, you can borrow USDC to take advantage of those short-term opportunities, and you can, as like with anything that's integrated with Morpho, you can pay back the loan at any time. It's just important that you monitor that LTV and margin requirement to make sure you don't fall foul of that and get liquidated.
Yeah, I think just to add to that too, I think it's great that you can borrow against you can stay liquid by borrowing against your metals, because I think, as you mentioned earlier, traditionally you have to like put up a lot of money, right, in order to acquire this. But if you're an average user and you want exposure to like the metals or to uranium, you can get the token and then you can borrow against it. And I think that's the beauty of like DeFi and tokenizing commodities like uranium, because you don't have to put up as much capital as these big institutions to get exposure, and to be able to borrow against it helps you stay liquid to capture those shorter term opportunities that you might need liquidity for. So cool. Check it out on Morpho, everyone. Or you said Oku, right? Was also
Oku, yeah. So Oku is the easiest way to get access to it. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. Yeah. So on the next question on my list, I mean, we already touched on this a bit, but how does the fractional ownership model work for XE308? And does this mean a user can start investing in the global energy market with just a small amount of Philippine peso or US dollar?
For sure, right? So we went and we bought £100,000 in weight in the physical market, and then when we turned those into XU308 kind of tokens, we made them 1 ounce tokens. So an ounce of uranium currently, it's had a decent run up. It's about $6, but there is no minimum in XU308 terms. So you can invest from as little as $1 or even less if you want to, but obviously transaction costs play a role, so it's got to be worth your while. But exactly that, right? The message that I give everyone is we've taken a market that requires millions of dollars to access before we launch to something that has no minimum entry point at this now, and you can get the benefit of the upside of something that's been historically a very uncorrelated but also good returning asset class relative to other commodities and other assets. So the accessibility and breaking down those capital barriers or high minimums, high capital amounts required to invest in it was one of the core driving aspects of why we wanted to uranium.
Yeah. So again, guys, I mean, you can get started with just you don't have to bust the bank to get started. And I think it's the beauty of the model of tokenizing metals and having XU308. Okay, so I guess we did touch on this one a little bit more, but maybe you could go a bit more into depth into this one. So why should a typical trader on coins.ph consider adding XU308 to their portfolio alongside traditional assets like Bitcoin, the king of the cryptos, or stable coins, or other things in their portfolio? So you did mention diversification, but maybe for you, as you mentioned, since you're into like portfolio construction, how would you probably advise or tell someone, how would you fit XU308 into a portfolio, and what are kind of the industries or sectors that it also touches on?
Yeah, sure. So I kind of not qualified to advise anyone on their own personal circumstances, but as I think about it and I look at the market more broadly, pretty much all cryptocurrencies exhibit a lot of correlation with Bitcoin. So if you're holding only crypto, you're kind of very exposed to the Bitcoin market cycle. And that's great a lot of the time. But when things turn, it's beneficial to have something that can still generate return. So, i.e., is not a stable coin, but will move differently or will be less volatile and have less drawdown than all the other crypto that you're likely to have, whether that's your Bitcoins, ETHs of the world, or whether that's more in the altcoin space. What you want to do is be confident about the risk that you're taking on and the potential return that that can give you, and then having a view directionally on, am I able to withstand a market drawdown and market cycle if the market does become more volatile and turn more bearish? Actually, what you've got with XU308 and other commodities is something that will still generate returns, isn't necessarily directly correlated to your existing crypto holdings if you've only got crypto, but it's still going to give you hopefully some return over and above what you get from just holding stable coins, world, right? But stable coins or yield bearing stable coins, there's a lot of those on the market now. So as you look at it, it's how do you want to balance the risk return profile of your overall portfolio, and when within that, what's the amount you want to allocate to the more risky or less risky assets, and how do those assets interact with each other, kind of, and how do they move together or not together, hopefully, so you're always generating returns regardless of the wider market cycle. If you're 100% in Bitcoin, you're fully exposed to the Bitcoin volatility, right? If you are adding other assets to that aren't correlated to Bitcoin, you've got more chance of riding out some of that volatility and having less drawdown and potentially more upside than if you were just 100% in one asset.
Awesome. Yeah, I guess I just like to plug to the community. If you guys have any other questions about XU308 for Ben, do drop them in our comment section on Facebook or Twitter, and maybe we can get to that, after our questions that we have listed and set here for Ben. So I guess the next and last set question that I have for you here, Ben, is this. So, given the global shift towards more clean, renewable energy, nuclear power, how does XE308 allow everyday users and, like the Filipinos who trade on coins to participate in the green energy transition through their mobile wallets and their mobile apps?
Yeah, I mentioned it and I alluded to it a little bit before, right, in terms of the wider thematic piece. So I don't think anyone anywhere in the world would say that we don't need more reliable energy. I think every country, every state, every town is looking for more reliable energy, and I think there's a growing recognition, depending on where you are, maybe less so in the US, about the importance of that being low carbon or more green energy. But the challenge has been, if you look at full renewables like hydro, like wind, like solar, there's an output and a reliability concern there, in terms of, if the sun doesn't shine, you get less energy production. If there's less wind, you get less energy production. And so if you look, as a lot of governments are across the world, we need more energy, we need more reliable energy from a 24/7 perspective, because the world operates around the clock in terms of everything we want to do now. But we also want to be cognizant of the carbon emissions and the impact we have on the world. Then actually nuclear is, once fully operational, one of the greenest or cleanest and most reliable energy outputs, pound for pound or dollar for dollar, than any other sort of energy source. And in which case, that's why we're seeing a huge wave of investment towards nuclear. As I mentioned before, if nuclear energy is in demand, by extension, that means we're going to need more uranium, because uranium is the only means of powering, once enriched, these nuclear fuel reactors and nuclear fuel stations, or nuclear energy stations. So what we like about uranium, again, is you're investing in the bedrock and the starting point for nuclear fuel and nuclear energy, rather than worrying about a utilities company's ability to execute on building the power station and run the power station effectively. You're betting on the economics of supply and demand, really, and saying, well, there's more demand for nuclear. that's critical for the green energy transition. So it's very much linked to ESG now. A lot of firms, a lot of big asset managers are starting to think about it as a more environmental investment as well, potentially. And we did some proprietary research, which you can find on uranium.io, which explains a bit more about that. So it's a very neat way to play it without having to go and do the research on all the individual utilities and how good they are at executing, how good they are, how robust they are financially. You're just investing in the pure asset that powers that green energy transition in terms of nuclear.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. I'm actually excited to get into some of the community questions now. So, guys, if you haven't already, do drop them in the comment section. Maybe we can choose a few before we wrap up the show. And I guess just a quick plug also, if you're listening in to our coins.ph traders, do join us on our Telegram. So it's Telegram/coins.ph Filipino. We'd love to chat with you guys there, or just if you're looking for a community and you want to discuss more about tokens like XU308, do make your way over there, and we'd be happy to engage in a discussion and enlighten you a bit more, and why should you probably, dip your hands into a token like XU308. Back to the program. I guess the first question, that I would like to pick from the comment section is this. So, from Mike Stephen, so they mentioned, maybe we can touch on the history again and how it came to be. So how did the idea of tokenization of uranium come up to this point, where we can trade it as XU308? So maybe it's a typo.
Yeah, so I think there's two parts to that question, right? One is the market development. So the market kind of until before we launched was only traded over the counter or OTC, and dominated by people in the supply chain. So utilities that need uranium, fuel buyers working on behalf of those utilities, and miners on the other side that are mining and creating the supply of uranium. And compared to gold and other assets, it was very underinvested from a financial perspective. We aren't the first to want to broaden access to it. As I mentioned, those closed-ended investment trusts have been around for a number of years. But what we saw with tokenization was an opportunity to kind of provide that same access, but in a more efficient way, where you can track the price of uranium, spot uranium, more effectively. You can reduce some of the cost, hopefully, down the line, or you can at least provide a comparable cost for retail investors to access it. And really what it's about is trying to attract more capital to this critically important asset that powers, as we see it, the needs of all of society. And the only way to increase the amount of capital is to make it more easy to access from a wider range of people. And that's why we felt that uranium, or U308, was a perfect candidate to start with from a tokenization perspective. And we think we can use this blueprint to do the same thing in other metals as well. So folks should keep an eye out for that. We'll be launching other metals using that same blueprint later this year. But uranium was interesting because it is so critical, but struggles from a lot of challenging market dynamics that have made it inaccessible to most investors until we launched kind of at the end of 2024.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike, for that question. The next question I'd like to pick out is this one. So, I think we should have mentioned this at the start, but Kenneth Ang, they asked, so what blockchain does XU308 utilize, and why was this chosen?
Yeah, so we launched XU308 on Etherlink, which is the smart rollup, so the EVM compatible smart rollup on Tezos. So we liked it because it benefits from all of this kind of great things of the Tezos layer one, so around decentralization, around security and scalability, but also being EVM compatible. It means we plug in very easily with the wider EVM ecosystem around wallets, on-chain analytics, you name it, it's kind of there, and it's within the EVM ecosystem. So it's fast, it's reliable, it's scalable, it's cheap. And look, candidly, the idea was first thought of within the Tezos ecosystem, and the Tezos ecosystem has incubated this project. So we're very happy that we're on Etherlink, and we think Etherlink ticks a lot of the boxes, not just for what we've done on XU308, but for anyone looking at real world asset tokenization. We think it's a fantastic platform.
Awesome. Thank you, Kenneth, for your question. And then maybe the last question that we can take out is this one. So maybe if you want to drop some alpha there, So Piola as well, they asked, are you also interested in tokenizing other isotopes of uranium that's suitable for nuclear power?
I think we're interested in how we can apply tokenization not just to other isotopes, so different levels of enriched material. The challenge there becomes with some of the off-chain aspects of that. The on-chain piece is fairly straightforward compared to some of the off-chain handling dynamics there, and also the explainability. I think that, for U308, going back to the first question, right? It's well established, albeit quite niche, as something that financial investors should want to invest in, and there have been other means to do that. Other aspects and other isotopes of enriched material, of enriched uranium, that takes quite a lot of explanation. And so while there's some interesting dynamics from a price return perspective and a risk return perspective, I should say more broadly, we feel that actually the bigger value could be in looking at earlier in the supply chain in terms of how can you look at uranium in the ground as an asset that becomes investable in order to funnel capital towards supporting the expansion of the supply side. So we've had some very early conversations in that regard. And I think we've got plenty of wood to chop with U308 before we start moving up into layers of enriched material as well. But absolutely nothing that we've ruled out at this point in time. We're small. We're a pretty lean and mean operation. So we take opportunities where they come. And if someone's got a great idea for how we could do that, we're open to those conversations.
All right. Piolo, thanks for that. Maybe last question. So I'll take another one from Kenneth Ang. So with the increase in projects, AI training, and deepen, do you see XU308 gaining more traction as the demand for energy increases?
Yeah, for sure. For sure we do. So we see it directly linked, as I said, in terms of AI and that coupling of between AI and nuclear energy. As you saw some of the announcements, I'm sure many folks would have seen last year, with a lot of investment from the big tech companies in nuclear energy. So, for example, Microsoft worked with the US government to reopen a closed nuclear power station called 3 Mile Island. We're seeing a lot of investment from the likes of OpenAI in new forms of technology around nuclear, so small modular reactors and the like. So investments in Oklo Energy and other new innovative reactor design. So I think it's a great way to play not just the energy cycle, but also the AI trend as well. Because if you look at it thematically, if there's more need for 24/7 baseload energy for training AI models, really nuclear is the only proven solution to do that at scale. If you think that's going to lead to more nuclear, then you're going to need more uranium. Therefore, the demand for uranium should increase. Ergo, investing in uranium is probably a good thing to do if you believe in that theme. Of course, people should research whether they believe in that theme or not. It's something that we believe in, but folks can make their own decision on that.
Awesome. So Kenneth, thanks for your question. I think that's all the time that we might have. So Ben, thank you so much for joining us on tonight's Coinmunity AMA. So it's been a pleasure to chat with you more about XU308, about tokenized uranium. I learned a lot, and I hope our viewers did too. Especially with metals trending right now, maybe they're looking to jump on the thing that will perform next best. So yeah, maybe just to wrap up the stream, Ben, maybe you can tell us where can the community find you, and maybe you'd like to also plug some of the social media of your projects.
Yeah, for sure. So uranium.io, it's a pretty neat domain we managed to secure, is where you can find all of the detailed information about the project and the pricing and everything that goes along with that. And then, of course, on X, uranium_io is sort of the first place we publish any exciting news and updates that we have. I'm also on X, so just Ben Elvidge on X. And you occasionally you'll see interesting updates from me, but uranium_io on X. We've got a Reddit. We're on Reddit. We're on Telegram as well. So all of the usual social channels, you can get direct access to those through uranium.io. But yeah, I hope to see many of you participating in our community there as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben, for your time. It's been a pleasure, Coinmunity, to have you as your host again. I'm JC Cadiz, Community Manager for coins.ph. And I'll see you all again on another episode of our weekly Coins live streams. Have a good rest of your evening, everyone, or afternoon where you are, Ben. So,
Perfect.
cheers, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Jesse.